A few years ago, I came across a photograph from an official military reception in Bangkok that felt entirely surreal. In a room filled with stern generals in stiff white uniforms and chests heavy with medals, there was one officer who stood out. He was small, snowy white, and standing on all fours atop a banquet table. This was Fufu, a miniature poodle who had been formally appointed as an Air Chief Marshal in the Royal Thai Air Force. To the world, it looked like a scene from a satirical film, but in the Kingdom of Thailand, it was a glimpse into the unfiltered life of King Maha Vajiralongkorn. For years, we've watched his reign play out like a high-stakes royal soap opera. There was the Alpine Hotel in Bavaria, where he sequestered himself with a harem of women while his country grappled with a global pandemic. Then there was the saga of his royal consort stripped of her titles and seemingly vanished into the prison system, only to be reinstated to full glory months later as if nothing had happened. It was a lifestyle defined by absolute power and a total disregard for convention, yet it was always shielded by the immense, almost sink-like prestige of his parents. But recently, the atmosphere in Thailand shifted. On October 24th, 2025, the flags across the country were lowered to half-mast. The Queen Mother, Sirikit, the final living link to the deeply revered era of the past, passed away at the age of 93. Suddenly, the national mood went from the chaotic noise of scandal to a heavy, year-long silence of official mourning. That's where the real tension begins. For decades, the king's eccentricities were buffered by his mother's grace and his father's legacy. Now that shield is gone. As the ceremonies end and the mourning black is tucked away, a quiet but urgent question is starting to ripple through the streets of Bangkok and beyond. Without the Queen Mother there to anchor the institution, can the Playboy King keep the party going, or is the Thai monarchy finally heading toward a reckoning it can't ignore?
That is really the pivotal question, isn't it? And while the world looks at the poodle and the crop tops and sees a farce, maybe, those of us who watch the structural mechanics of Southeast Asia see something much, much more calculated.
It's not just random eccentricity.
Not at all. I mean, the tabloids, they focus on that stuff because it gets clicks. But if you actually strip away all the gossip, what you find underneath is a deliberate a systematic restructuring of the entire Thai state.
Right.
This isn't just about a king who likes to party in Bavaria. It's about a king who has spent the last several years methodically dismantling the constitutional guardrails that were supposed to contain him.
And these are guardrails that have been in place for, almost a century, right? Since the 1930s.
Exactly. We are witnessing in real time a reversal of the 1932 revolution. That was the moment, the critical juncture, where Thailand moved from an absolute monarchy to a constitutional one. The current reign is effectively an attempt to move that dial all the way back. And so to really understand this reckoning that you're talking about, we have to ignore the scandals for a minute.
Put the poodle aside.
Put the poodle aside.
Yeah.
Instead, look at the triad of power he has consolidated. Wealth, law, and image. Specifically, how he's taken direct personal control of the national fortune, how he's weaponized the legal code to silence any dissent, and how the institution itself is now struggling to manufacture legitimacy because that organic love people had for his parents, it's gone.
Okay, because like you said, when we talk about monarchs in the modern era, you think of the UK or Japan, we usually assume their finances are, somewhat ceremonial.
Right, they're symbolic.
Exactly. They get a stipend, they have some castles, but they don't own the national economy. But I've been looking into the financial shifts in Bangkok, and it seems like a completely different beast.
Right. In the UK or Japan, you have the civil list or, similar mechanisms. It's essentially a state budget allocated for royal expenses, and it's subject to some form of parliamentary oversight.
It's a salary, basically.
A very, very large salary. But yes, in Thailand, we are talking about something called the Crown Property Bureau, or the CPB. And to understand the sheer scale of this, we have to look at how it confuses even the most sophisticated financial minds on the planet.
I was actually talking to a contact recently. Let's call him a senior portfolio manager at a private equity firm based in Singapore. This is a guy who manages risk for a living, someone who maps out complex ownership structures in emerging markets every single day.
So he knows what he's looking at.
He knows what he's looking at. And he told me he spent months trying to map the Thai Crown Property Bureau, and he described it. He said it was like trying to navigate a labyrinth where the walls physically moved every time he turned a corner.
That's a very, very common experience for anyone, especially foreign investors, looking at Thailand. The opacity is a feature, not a bug.
Right. And he said that in most constitutional frameworks, royal finances are either, a matter of public record, or at the very least a predictable line item in the national budget. But in Bangkok, he watched in real time as billions of dollars in assets, and we're talking about controlling stakes in the nation's largest banks and its biggest industrial conglomerates.
The crown jewels of the Thai economy.
Really, he watched them get transferred from institutional oversight directly into the king's personal name.
And that is the crucial distinction, into his personal name. That's the part that changes everything.
Exactly. And the way he described the feeling, he said, imagine the unease in a boardroom. So you're looking at what you thought was a national asset, something that has always been treated as, state property and trust. And suddenly, overnight, it becomes a private asset with no change in the law passed by an elected parliament, just a change in the king's will. He called it a transparency tax. He said he realized that when the line between a monarch's private purse and the nation's economic bedrock just blurs into nothing, the risk becomes completely impossible to quantify.
That transparency tax is absolutely real. I mean, if you are that manager in Singapore, you have to ask yourself a fundamental question. Is this bank I'm invested in operating for the benefit of all its shareholders? Or is it operating for the king?
And those two things might not be the same.
They might not align at all. What's good for the monarch's personal finances might not be what's good for the national economy or for minority shareholders, and you have no recourse.
The traditionalist argument, as I understand it, would be that the king is the ultimate guarantor of the land, the father of the nation. So if he holds the wealth, isn't that just ensuring the nation's strength? Why does it even matter if the title deed says Crown Property Bureau or Maha Vajiralongkorn?
It matters because of the concept of accountability. It's the core distinction between the state as an abstract entity and the person of the ruler. And to get that, we have to go all the way back to 1932.
The revolution.
The revolution. When the People's Party staged the coup that ended absolute rule, one of their primary demands was to separate the king's private wealth, which was called the privy purse, from the assets of the kingdom, the crown property.
They wanted to stop him from treating the national treasury like his personal checking account.
They saw that the fusion of personal and state wealth was a key pillar of absolutism. So the Crown Property Bureau was created to be a holding pen, for lack of a better term.
A trust.
Yes, a trust. The assets, and we're talking about huge tracts of land in central Bangkok, massive stakes in Siam Commercial Bank, Siam Cement Group, were held for the monarchy as an institution, not for the monarch as a person.
And there was a key structural check in place, wasn't there?
The Minister of Finance, a member of the government, sat on the board of the CPB, usually as its chairman. That implied that these assets were, in some fundamental way, public. They belonged to the nation to support the dignity of the throne, but they were not the king's pocket money.
Okay, and that distinction, that firewall, it held for decades, right? I remember back in, 2008 and 2011, Forbes magazine released their annual richest royals list,
Yes.
and they put King Bhumibol at the very top. They estimated his wealth at something like 30, maybe $35 billion.
And do you remember the reaction from the Thai government?
They were furious, absolutely incensed.
The Ministry of Foreign Affairs issued these incredibly stern denials. They launched a full-on campaign saying, essentially, Forbes is wrong. You are counting crown property assets as the king's personal wealth. These are state assets held in trust for the nation. They are not his.
So they were policing that boundary very, very carefully.
They were incredibly eager to maintain that separation, at least in the eyes of the world. The official line was, it's not his money, he just holds the keys. That was the stance under the 9th reign, under King Bhumibol.
But under the 10th reign,
Under King Vajiralongkorn, that argument wasn't just abandoned, it was legally demolished. And this is where we get to the moving walls that your Singaporean friend was talking about. In 2017, the junta-appointed Legislative Assembly passed a new Crown Property Act.
this happened pretty quietly, didn't it? I don't remember it making huge international headlines.
It was done very, very quietly. But the text of the law itself was revolutionary. First, it removed the requirement for the Minister of Finance to chair the board.
So government oversight gone.
It then explicitly allowed the king to appoint the entire board at his pleasure. So the public representative was kicked out of the room, and the king could now stack the board with his own loyalists.
Okay, that's a huge step.
But it was just the first step. Then came the second wave in 2018. The CPB itself issued a statement. It announced that all assets previously held in the name of the Crown Property Bureau would be transferred to the king personally.
You're talking about a 23% stake in Siam Commercial Bank, one of the country's biggest, a 33% stake in Siam Cement Group, a massive industrial conglomerate.
And all the prime real estates. Overnight, shares worth, by conservative estimates, around $30 billion moves from a state trust status to private property.
$30 billion in personal assets. I mean, just for context, that puts him above the British royal family by a magnitude of, what, 50?
100 times. Yeah.
The British Crown estate is wealthy, it's worth billions, but the king doesn't own it. He can't just wake up one morning and decide to sell Regent Street.
Right.
Vajiralongkorn now legally owns these shares. He can do with them as he pleases. The dividends, which are enormous, flow directly to him, not to the state. And because these assets were also made tax-exempt, the accumulation of wealth is just accelerating. This sounds a lot like what some political scientists call a bourgeois monarchy, but that term always confuses me a little. Bourgeois usually refers to the middle class, the merchants, the capitalists who eventually overthrow the feudal lords. How can a king be a bourgeois?
It's a fascinating inversion of traditional Marxist theory, really.
Yeah.
Usually we think of the monarchy as this feudal relic that kind of hinders or gets in the way of capitalism. But in Thailand, the monarchy has become the ultimate capitalist. The king isn't just sitting back and collecting feudal rents and land anymore. He is the biggest single player on the Thai stock market. He is the biggest landlord in the central business district of Bangkok. He embodies the bourgeois ethic of profit accumulation more than anyone else in the country.
So he's operating inside the market, but he's simultaneously above all the market's regulations.
Exactly. And this is what creates what's called the network monarchy. If you are a business tycoon in Thailand, say you run a retail empire or a telecom giant, you cannot ignore the palace. It's impossible.
You have to play the game.
You have to work towards the monarchy, as the phrase goes. You enter into joint ventures with royal companies. You donate massively to royal charities. You basically pay tribute. It creates this unique form of royal capitalism, where your economic success is determined less by market forces and more by your proximity and loyalty to the king.
Which brings us right back to the Singaporean manager. If you're a foreign investor, you're not in that club. You're trying to play poker, but the guy across the table literally owns the casino, he owns the deck of cards, and he also wrote the rules of the game.
And he can change the rules mid-hand without telling you. That is the friction that global markets feel. It's almost impossible to do a standard risk assessment on a company like Siam Commercial Bank when its largest shareholder is a semi-divine absolute monarch who doesn't answer to the Securities and Exchange Commission.
Okay, so we have this incredible consolidation of wealth. He's effectively taken the nation's trust fund and put it directly into his own wallet. But money is only one pillar of power. You can be the richest man in the world, but if people start organizing against you, or if they simply hate you, money alone doesn't guarantee your safety.
Which is precisely why you need the second pillar, the law. Or, more specifically, the ability to define what can and cannot be said about you.
This brings us to Section 112, the Lèse-Majesté law. We hear about it in the news every time there's a protest in Bangkok, but I think for a lot of people outside Thailand, it just sounds like a very strict libel law, you know, don't be mean to the king. But looking at how it's actually applied, it seems to go far, far beyond simple defamation.
It's not a defamation law in the Western sense at all. In, say, the UK or the US, libel is a civil dispute. If I publish a lie about you, you can sue me for damages. Section 112 is a provision of the criminal code. It's treated as a crime against national security.
A crime against the state itself.
Exactly. And the punishment is mandatory. 3 to 15 years in prison, per count.
And that per count detail is absolutely critical to understanding the psychological terror of this law. I was reading a thread on an encrypted forum recently, and it was discussing the case of a graduate student in Bangkok. This wasn't some hardcore activist, you know, throwing Molotov cocktails. This was a young woman who found herself just staring at a blank screen for hours, absolutely terrified because she had accidentally liked a satirical post about the king's extended stays in Bavaria.
Just a like. Not even a comment or a share.
Like a silent digital gesture of agreement. In her world, as she described it, the digital space isn't a playground for ideas field. She described this feeling of living in a centralized digital environment, knowing the state employs thousands of these so-called cyber scouts whose entire job is to monitor social media sentiment.
That's the reality of what some call digital authoritarianism.
Right. And she knew that one wrong click, one gesture of agreement could cost her a decade of her life. She talked about her friends just disappearing from social media, not physically vanishing at first, but their profiles would just stop. They'd be replaced by that generic account suspended notice.
And then you hear later they've been charged.
Exactly. And she said it made her feel like a stranger in her own country. She looks at her phone, she sees a truth that is widely known. The king is in Germany, but she knows that typing that truth is a potential crime.
That phrase, stranger in her own country, is heartbreakingly accurate for so many in this generation. We sometimes call them the orphan generation.
Why orphan? What does that mean?
Because the previous generation, the one that grew up under King Bhumibol, was raised to view the king as a father. There was this deep-seated paternalistic bond. The king protected them, or at least that was the pervasive narrative.
The father of the nation.
Yes. But this new generation, Gen Z, the digital natives who grew up with the internet, they don't see a father. They see a ruler. And when they look to the state for protection or dialogue, the state responds with handcuffs and prison sentences. They feel abandoned, orphaned by the very institution that claims to love them as its children.
Again, hasn't this law always been on the books? I mean, Thailand has been a kingdom for centuries. Surely you couldn't insult King Bhumibol either without consequences.
The law was there, yes. But the application of the law has shifted radically. King Bhumibol was actually quite savvy about this. In 2005, he gave a very famous birthday speech where he explicitly said, quote, "The king can be criticized."
He said that publicly.
He argued that if the king is not human and cannot be criticized, then the king is nothing. It was rhetoric, of course. People were still arrested under his reign. But Bhumibol often used his royal pardon power.
So it was a sort of performance.
It was a very effective performance. He would let the charges be filed, let the legal system do its thing, and then he would sweep in and pardon the offender. It reinforced his image as the benevolent father, forgiving his naughty but ultimately loved children. It was a pressure release valve for the whole system.
And under King Vajiralongkorn?
That valve has been welded shut. Under the current reign, especially since the massive youth-led protests of 2020 and 2021, the law is being used systematically and brutally to decapitate the political opposition. You just have to look at the case of Mongkol Busbus-Thirakat.
This is the activist from up in Chiang Rai.
Earlier this year, an appeals court increased his sentence to 50 years in prison. 50.
That's a life sentence. What did he do? Did he try to assassinate someone? Was he plotting a coup?
He posted on Facebook. He posted comments and images that were deemed critical of the monarchy. The court just stacked the charges. Remember, it's the count. So a series of posts ends up equaling half a century behind bars.
Fine. But here is the part I still struggle to understand from a legal perspective. In a normal court, in most places, truth is a defense. If I say, you stole that car, and you did in fact steal the car, I can't be found guilty of defamation. Is that not the case here?
No. Under Section 112, truth is explicitly not a defense. You could post a photograph of the king doing something he actually did. You could cite a financial transfer from a bank record that actually happened. If the court determines that the information defames, insults, or threatens the majesty of the king, you are guilty. The factual accuracy is irrelevant.
So the law isn't protecting facts. It's protecting what? A feeling, an aura.
It is protecting sacredness. This is a legal and philosophical concept that some scholars call royalist jurisprudence. The legal system in Thailand isn't just based on Western civil codes. It's hybridized with this ancient Hindu-Buddhist concept of the Dharmaraja, or the God King.
The king as a divine figure.
Exactly. In this worldview, the king is legally inviolable. He is, by definition, above the law because he is the source of the law. To criticize him is not just to defame a man, it is to attack the cosmic order of the nation.
So when these young activists, people like Arnon Nampa or Penguin, are denied bail over and over again, it's not because the court thinks they're a flight risk.
They are being held as a form of pretrial punishment. In royalist jurisprudence, the very act of questioning the king is seen as so spiritually and socially dangerous that the accused must be removed from society immediately to contain the pollution. They are treated as guilty until proven innocent because the victim in the crime is the semi-divine king himself.
It's a complete collision of two different operating systems. You have the orphan generation running on a liberal, democratic OS, free speech, transparency, facts matter. And you have the state running on a feudal, sacred OS, hierarchy, obedience, sacredness. And Section 112 is the firewall that just burns anyone who tries to cross over.
And this rigid, brutal enforcement creates silence. But as you noted with the student story, it's a heavy, pregnant silence. It's not harmony, it's suppression. And history tells us time and again that enforced silence usually breeds explosive resentment down the line.
We've talked about the wealth, the hard power of money. We've talked about the law, the hard power of prison. But monarchies, you could argue, survive mostly on soft power. They survive because people want them to exist. They survive on love.
Or emotional capital, as we might call it in political science.
Yeah.
A reservoir of goodwill.
Right. And this is where the story gets really interesting and, frankly, a little bit tragic. I want to shift our focus now from the boardrooms and the courtrooms to a small, dusty hardware store in a quiet corner of Bangkok. I was reading a profile of a shopkeeper, let's call him Somchai, who has been running the same shop for 50 years.
The quintessential Bangkok old-timer.
Actually. And like almost every shop, every home, every restaurant in Thailand for the last half century, behind his counter, high up on the wall, he has a picture. It's dusty, the frame is a bit gold and gaudy, but it's a photo of the late Queen Sirikit from the 1970s.
The classic portrait. Her in the beautiful Thai silk dress, maybe a tiara, looking very serene.
That's the one. Now, for Somchai, putting that picture up wasn't a legal requirement. It wasn't something he did because he was afraid of Section 112. He did it because he genuinely loved her. He calls it his inherited emotional capital. He grew up seeing her and King Bhumibol as the true parents of the nation. But the profile went on to describe his reaction to the new world.
The post-2025 world. The world without her.
Somchai walks out of his little shop and he sees the SkyTrain station nearby. And instead of a dusty framed photo, there's a massive high-definition LED billboard. It's playing this polished cinematic loop of the current king, Vajiralongkorn, in full military regalia and sitting everywhere. But Somchai says he feels nothing.
The disconnect.
He described it as cold. The old photo in his shop was warm. The new screen is cold. He feels like the image is being projected at him rather than coming from him. He said, and this really stuck with me, the old reverence was in the heart. The new reverence is just electricity.
Wow. That is the central crisis of the 10th reign, summed up in one sentence. Somchai is describing the difference between what we call organic legitimacy and performative legitimacy.
Let's unpack that history a bit, because for listeners who didn't grow up in Thailand, it's hard to grasp just how powerful the emotional regime of King Bhumibol and Queen Sirikit really was.
And it was built over 70 years of relentless work. We have to give credit to the sheer physical effort of their image-making. You would see thousands of photos of King Bhumibol with a map in his hand, sweat literally dripping off his nose, standing in a rice paddy, talking to farmers about irrigation systems.
He had a camera around his neck all the time.
And Queen Sirikit would be right there with him, promoting traditional textiles with her wardrobe, visiting wounded soldiers in the border regions during the communist insurgency. They were the working monarchs.
They were accessible. They were on the ground.
They were the father and mother. And Queen Sirikit specifically played a vital geopolitical and, well, emotional role within the family itself.
Yeah.
She was the buffer.
What do you mean by that?
She was the shock absorber for the institution. Even when the current king, back when he's a crown prince, was acting out, or when rumors of his unconventional lifestyle circulated, the people's deep love for the mother shielded the son.
Right.
You would hear ordinary Thais say things like, well, he is her son. We respect him because we love her. Her moral authority was so vast that it effectively covered his deficits. It bought him time. It bought him tolerance from the public.
So her emotional capital was transferable in a way.
Exactly. But now, look at the date you mentioned in the intro, October 24, 2025. Queen Sirikit passes away. The buffer is gone. The shock absorber is removed. And for the first time in his life, the king is standing alone, exposed directly to public sentiment without the protective filter of his parents' immense merit.
And the palace must know this, right? They can't be blind to the fact that Somchai, the shopkeeper, isn't feeling the same love for the LED screen.
They are acutely aware of it, and their response has been to double down, to ramp up the production values. This is what we call hyper-royalism.
And that's what the giant LED screens are. That's hyper-royalism in action.
It is the idea that if the natural organic feeling fades, you must increase the volume and the ubiquity of the royal image to compensate. We see it in things like the Bike for Dad or Bikes for Mom events, these massive state-organized cycling rallies where everyone is told to wear yellow or blue.
It looks very impressive on a drone camera, a sea of yellow shirts.
Incredible. But it is organized from the top down. It is administrative love, not organic love. It feels like corporate PR. We will now schedule a nationwide display of affection for 9:00 a.m. on Sunday.
Participation is strongly encouraged.
It is state-sponsored soft power. They are trying to use the tools of modern media cinematic videos, pop songs, organized rallies to simulate the connection that Bhumibol built naturally over decades. But as Somchai the shopkeeper noticed, you can feel the difference. You can't manufacture warmth with an LED screen.
And the imagery itself has changed so dramatically, hasn't it? As you said, we don't see Vajiralongkorn sweating in rice paddies with a map. That's not his brand.
No. The visual language has shifted back to something much more archaic, more distant. He is almost always depicted as the Dharmaraja, the distant sacred god king. He's informal, often elaborate military uniforms, or he's performing complex Brahmin rituals that most ordinary people don't even understand. He's projecting power and distance, not accessibility and empathy.
Which seems like a pretty dangerous gamble in the 21st century.
It creates what we call a crisis of modernity. On one hand, you have a digital native generation seeing candid photos of the king in a crop top in Germany on Twitter. On the other hand, you have the state projecting a giant billboard of him as a semi-divine being in Bangkok. The cognitive dissonance is just too jarring. The hyper-royalism is trying to paper over that crack in the official image, but the crack is widening every day.
So if we look at the entire board, the strategy has fundamentally shifted. Under the old reign, the deal was sort of, I work for you, I protect you, and in return, you love and respect me. That's a form of soft power, of hegemony.
Yes, based on consent.
But under the new reign, the deal seems to be, I own the banks, so I have the wealth. I control the courts, so I have the law. And I will flood your vision with my image, whether you like it or not.
That sounds much more like raw dominance.
That is the shift from soft power to hard power. The father-child dynamic you mentioned is dead. We have moved into a ruler-subject dynamic. The king seems to have decided that he does not need to be loved in the same way his father was. He simply needs to be obeyed. And that brings us right back to the reckoning. We started with the question of whether the Playboy King can keep the party going now that his mother is gone. And it seems the answer is, he's not even trying to keep her party going. He's throwing a completely different kind of party, where he owns the venue, writes the guest list, and controls the bouncers.
It is a profound gamble. History suggests that monarchies that rely solely on wealth and coercion, without that reservoir of emotional capital from the people, are brittle. They look strong and unassailable on the outside, like a great dam holding back water. But if a crack forms, they don't bend, they break.
We often think of monarchies as institutions that survive by being timeless, by staying the same while the world changes around them. But what we are seeing in Bangkok is a monarchy that is changing aggressively and deliberately. It's shedding the soft power of love and replacing it with the hard power of wealth and law. The question isn't just whether this king can keep the party going. The real point is this. When a king decides he no longer needs to be a father to his people, but instead chooses to be their landlord, their judge, and their CEO, he hasn't just changed his style. He has become something else entirely.